Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. Today we're going to be talking about the Suyematsu Farm Legacy Alliance, which is dedicated to preserving and enhancing the heritage of Akio Suyematsu and the farm that was his family's and is still in existence. Before we do that, though, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Puget Sound Coast Salish people. Specifically here, the Suquamish tribe, the people of the clear salt water, who have been living on these waters and these lands since time immemorial. And we honor them and are continuing to learn from their stewardship of lands and waters, which is to some degree specifically our topic today. Also, I'd like to thank Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which is a sponsor of Something to Talk About and the Senior Community Center. They offer independent living and assisted living and memory care up on a beautiful Rolling Bay campus right around the corner from Bay Hay and Feed. They have day stay and respite programs. You can learn more and even enjoy a free lunch or dinner and a tour. Call Celia or Jamie at 206 594-1010 or look up fieldstonecommunities.com on those internet webs. So Carol Wrights is with us today, along with John Garfunkel and others. But Carol, would you start us off a little bit about what the Legacy Alliance is and goals of it are?
Sure. First of all, I'm Carol Wrights, and the two titles I have is member of the Rotary Club of Bainbridge Island and the president of the Bainbridge Island Japanese American community. And it's my affiliation with the Bainbridge Island Japanese American community that has allowed me to partner and work with the Suyematsu Farm Legacy Alliance, which was formed, was it 2 years ago, John? Is that about right?
We came together about 2 years
Two
ago,
years
and we
ago.
officially formed about over a year ago.
Yeah. So the idea is that the the acreage, which is 5 acres, is declared as a historic district, and the city owns that property. But there's also a lot of buildings on that historic district that need to be attended to, need to be repaired, need to be restored so that it can become a real asset to the community in terms of sharing the history as well as the functions on a farm. So there's a group of stakeholders that got together. So that includes the Japanese American community, the Indopino community, members of the Suyematsu family, which includes a couple of us. And I was hoping Brian would be with us here today. And John and all that, let's see, Educulture nonprofit. And John has been immersed in this for years, so he is a much better historian when it comes to the details of the past, as well as people who are interested in historic preservation. So we've got a really great group that has officially now formed under the nonprofit Suyematsu Farm Legacy Alliance. And we just officially signed a 1-year contract with the city of Bainbridge to be responsible for starting the process of maintaining those buildings. So we are looking at the process of doing that, as well as raising funds so that we can get a lot accomplished in that 1 year.
The buildings that you're hoping to reclaim have just been derelict and ignored. Is
That,
that
that that's correct, right? Yeah, so of course those buildings have been around for over 80 years. And so there has to be maintenance done. There has to be things to happen so that we can actually occupy it and then create a site for continuing education about the whole Japanese American as well as Indopino story that we want to be able to tell. And when you think about farming, that is a real basic function of early life on the island. So that really bookcases the whole exclusion memorial that we have. You know, the exclusion memorial is just 3 years out of the whole history of the farming and the Japanese American life on the island. So we think it's really important to maintain that.
Yeah, I think that the idea of trying to have more than, I mean, it is a working farm, right, John?
Correct. The 5 acres that is now called the Suyematsu Farm Historic Property is part of the original 40 acres of the Suyematsu Farm, which will be 100 years old in 2028. The Suyematsus had come to the island almost a decade earlier, but had bought their first land on that property that now is the oldest continuously farmed land we have in this entire region, and the largest working farm that we have on Bainbridge Island and probably Kitsap County. So the rest of that acreage um, is used for working agriculture with about 5 different farmers. Some of the original property, it's important to note, the original 40 acres is still privately owned by the Bentrons and Betsy Whittick. The other half is owned by the city of Bainbridge. Akio Suyematsu sold his portion of that farm, his last 15 acres. He had sold a portion of the farm to the Bentrons in the 70s. And he sold his last 15 acres to the city of Bainbridge at the turn of the millennium, when there was a movement to buy up a lot of wetlands, native lands, and farmland on the island. And the city of Bainbridge purchased 60 acres of farmland in 2000, and these 20 of the 40 acres is part of that 60 acres. In 2016, the city of Bainbridge, through its arm, the Historic Preservation Commission, redesignated the 5 acres that we're talking about as a historic preservation district. So when you drive around the island and you see historic signs on buildings that say when they were first built, those are part of the local historic registry. And for the first time in 2016, the city of Bainbridge placed that entire 5 acres, which is the original homestead that the family built in 1928, as a historic preservation district and part of our local historic registry. When Akio Suyematsu died in 2012, there was an official day named after him, a proclamation, August 19th, as Akio Suyematsu Day. And at that time, that land that Akio had sold to the city of Bainbridge officially became under the official ownership and responsibility of the city of Bainbridge. So since that time, it has been owned and operated. It was owned by the city of Bainbridge, and for about a decade, it was managed by Friends of the Farm. And over a year ago, Friends of the Farms was removed from the master lease of that 5 acres. And the city of Bainbridge began talking with us about taking over that historic property, which has been neglected for the last decade or so and needs some really immediate repairs, which we are charged with doing for the next year in order to then work on the stabilization that's needed for some of the other historic structures, such as the barn, which everyone sees when they drive by on Day Road, as well as the historic picker cabins that tell the story of the Indopino community, which is so important. When we had Native Canadians coming from Cowichan Nation, Vancouver Island, down to Bainbridge Island farms, predominantly Japanese American farms, to work as migrant labor for the season. They eventually intermarried with Filipino men because at that time, the Asian Exclusion Act barred Filipino women from immigrating to America. And we have this amazing community, the Indopino community, and those picker sheds will be preserved so we can help tell that story along with the story of not just the Suyematsu family, but as Carol was saying, the whole Japanese American experience, as well as the entire agricultural experience on Bainbridge Island, because it's the last of the original Bainbridge Island farms.
Having still existing family home and picker sheds and so forth is something that we don't want to lose.
Yes, because there's really no place else on Bainbridge Island, let alone probably if you go up to Eby's Landing on Whidbey, maybe, but that's, a lot of that's been torn down. It's really will be the only place where you can bear witness to 100 years of history. Looking at the original structures, those structures are still standing close to 100 years later. Since interns were moved out of the house, they moved in. Akio moved out of that property in 2005 because he had purchased 25 acres over on Manzanita, where he Karen Selvar still farms his Christmas tree farm. He built a house for himself over there, and interns had been living there for close to a decade before the house got in such bad shape that they had to close it to make it habitable. So our job right now is to do the repairs to make the house occupiable, and then start to lay the groundwork for a master plan that's going to eventually stabilize and restore that entire heritage district. There's not just the barn and the picker cabins and the original farmhouse, but a series of workshops and outbuildings in which you can date the entire history of agriculture from original horsepower and before there was the word organic to what is now the largest farm that practices sustainable agriculture, that grows all kinds of food for us locally.
Oh,
Um,
I know that Akio has been praised for his organic practices, and you're saying that a lot of those are that's just the way it was.
well, prior to, yeah, there really wasn't a word organic in the sense of applying to farming practices up until just post World War II when they started introducing certain chemicals and fertilizers. Akio and other Bainbridge Island farmers tried to use some of those chemical fertilizers because the famous Marshall strawberries they'd been raising had been shrinking as they, learned that you can't grow strawberries over and over again on the same land. Akio was the first farmer in the 1980s to go organic on Bainbridge before it became largely fashionable in the bigger agricultural community here on Bainbridge and elsewhere in the 1990s, because he realized that he needed to be able to feed his soil to make it healthy in order for it to grow healthy crops. And when I asked Akio in his later years why he continued to farm after all of his peers had either moved on to other jobs after World War II, retired, and turned their farms into golf courses like the Coras did. Um, he looked at me and he said two words that I've never forgotten. He said, clean living. And he felt that he needed to take care of, he said, you take care of the soil will take care of you. And he saw that dirt as gold to him. And he grew the biggest private composting operation on the island in its heyday when he was alive, and started what you could say is the organic farm movement that rose up in the 1990s that you can still see and taste and experience today on the island and through farmers markets and other local food places.
You see, Gina Corpus has joined us. Hi,
Oh, great.
Gina. I think you've got your camera on, but not
No,
open or something, but it's fine. We can hear you if you have anything you want to jump in here and say as well. You just need to unmute and I can ask you to do that. Carol, why don't you talk a little bit about we're kind of under a time crunch right now
oh,
to
sure.
try to raise money to do the repairs, the immediate repairs that John was talking about. And I know we're right in the middle of One Call for All, and you're one of the one One Call for
Yeah.
All participating organizations. So just give us sort of what your short-term goals are right now.
Oh, sure. And John, correct me if I'm wrong. Well, first of all, I would like to acknowledge the City Council of Bainbridge Island. They are they got really tight budgets and they're really being very careful with the funds as they start planning going forward. But they were able to commit to us $60,000, which is a great way for us to get started and get those immediate repairs needed. For example, the roof. If we can get that roof repaired, that'll help us prevent much more damage and allow us some time to do some of the other internal interior stuff that need to be working on. So we're probably looking at least twice that much needed to do the initial repairs. But of course, long term, there's going to be, when you're talking about buildings and all that, it's probably going to be about $120,000 to $140,000.
Yeah, and so if you give to the SFLA, that's where that's going to go, is to
Right,
help with
exactly.
that next wave. So you're probably working right now. I see, Brian, you've also joined us. Thank you very much for doing that. We've been talking a little bit about the history and about the reason why it's so important to protect the buildings and structures so that they stand as a monument and as an educational and teaching tool. Um, so,
Can I
um,
just add some details to that for
Yeah.
certainly.
listeners? Because I think people like to know, especially through One Call for All, if their money is going to something real and tangible. We have in front of us what is $120,000 for SFLA to raise to go along with the $60,000 the city of Bainbridge is giving us to as a grant for a total of $180,000 in expenses to be able to do some major urgent emergency repairs to the farmhouse. The farmhouse has had a major leak in it for a while, and there's some serious mold that has to be removed. So we need to raise money to replace the roof, which is about $10,000, and we need money to remove the mold, which is going to be close to about another $20,000. And then there's a whole series of repairs that are required in terms of getting the house back up to code related to electrical and plumbing and safety, and also to allow some interior work to be done after the mold is removed to allow us to use that space both as an office as well as to start the larger restoration work. So that's exactly where every dollar that's raised by One Call for All is going to go towards the $120,000 we need to raise um, to see through the larger budget that it's going to take to do that work. So first up is the roof that's we're now scheduling to be repaired. It'll be followed by the mold removal, and then we're working with Fairbank Construction, who's been so generous in helping us to prepare estimates and assess the farmhouse in terms of its current standing and work to meet the list that the city's given us of what needs to be done to bring the house back up to code and occupancy. So every one of those dollars that is raised through One Call for All will go directly towards the repair of the Suyematsu farmhouse. And once that is solid and steady and weatherproof, we can then do the bigger restoration work, not just to the farmhouse, but all the other historic structures to return them to what in the historic preservation world is called a period of significance, in which you can visit a historic structure and see it in its original, when it was sort of in its heyday and height of operations. And our goal is to return the farmhouse, the barn, and other historic structures that were built by the Suyematsu family by hand and horse, and the dynamite that was used to blow up the stumps. They milled all the wood from that farm that 840 acres that at one time had been forested, and that wood was used to build all those structures that are still standing. And so our goal is to do the full restoration, turn it into an active visitor center, like Carol said, to make it a bookend to both the memorial as well as helping tell the story of the Indepino community, as we said, the history of agriculture, the history of Bainbridge Island that you can experience on that farm. So we need to get all this done this winter to avoid any further damage to the house. But we now have,
When you say all this, you mean the roof and the mold work?
right, in order to both weatherproof the house to prevent any more leaking, but also to remove the mold so that we can start doing some of the other repairs. So we submitted a budget to the Bainbridge City of Bainbridge. They approved that budget. They offered us $60,000 towards that budget as a good faith gesture towards this partnership that we're looking forward in the long term. And that's our goal for the first year that is contained within this lease, this agreement that we have with the City of Bainbridge, that we then hope to turn into a long-term agreement once all that basic work is done.
Great. So it sounds like I got lost in the numbers a little bit there. You have a budget of 160. You've got 60,
$180,000,
and 60 of that has come from the city.
and 60 of that 180 is come from the City of Bainbridge, and we need to raise another 120 to complete all of those repairs. I want to remind also everybody that we have an all volunteer board. We have no staff. So we're all donating our time to make this happen. And we've had some very wonderful collaborations with Hood Canal Roofing and Fairbank Construction on the island who are working with us and offering us some wonderful gestures of support and contributing their time and effort and helping to make this happen and bringing us to a budget that we can really work with.
Oh, I'm wondering if Brian Chibiyama, if you want to just unmute here and tell us a little bit about your engagement and why this is so important to you?
Well, I think a long time ago when Akio had left this property to, or sold the property to the city, I think it seemed like there was a big interest in the farm and preserving the way it was. And then what happened was that this thing became very well, it just seemed to be ignored. So it just was a kind of falling apart. And so we were thinking that this is kind of a unique situation. There isn't really anything else quite like it on the island, and it's sort of like one of the last things left on the island that sort of connects us with the history of that time.
And Brian, how are
And
you
so-
related to Akio? Can you explain that?
Okay, so Akio's sister is my mother, so he was my uncle on my mother's side.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I think that since there is part of the building still there and it looks like it's doable as far as trying to preserve it, I think that's what we're looking to do.
Wondering, John was talking earlier about the idea of, and I'm not going to get the words right, but the idea of preserving and restoring to
Period of significance.
period of significance. And I'm wondering if your family has resources, records or pictures or things like that that will help with that project to make it so it will reflect what it was like when it was in use.
Yes, my brother has most of them. I think we've shared pretty much all of them with the Alliance. I think Jonathan has all of them but it seems like we always find a couple here and there that for some reason got overlooked. But I think pretty much all of them that we have are around. My brother did a lot of work in trying to digitize a lot of the photos because they were just regular photos and
Right.
negatives, things like that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be very.
If I may add, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, John. I was just going to say that's got to be very helpful.
Yeah, the family has been wonderful from the very beginning. We started doing educational programming on the farm and giving us resources that they had. But also, what's remarkable about the property was that not very much was taken out of the house and moved elsewhere. So we have an amazing collection of existing artifacts that are part of the historic property already to be able to use in terms of period of significance. For example, the very famous sharpening stone that the family used, there's a picture of Akio I can show if people want to see it. Standing by that stone, we have all original farm equipment. And what's really amazing about this effort is that it's not just the contributions from the Suyematsu family, but also working with the Indopino community, the larger Japanese American community. We have all these larger resources to put the farm in context. And I think that's one of the unique aspects of the Alliance and how we came together and who we represent. Our board is made up of 6 stakeholder groups that originally came together out of concern about the endangered state of the farm. And we each came together and our board represents all those 6 stakeholders that bring the perspective of the Bainbridge Island Japanese American community, the Indopino community, the Suyematsu family, the historic preservation community, the education community, and the farming community. Brian McWhirter and Betsy Whittick, who are proteges of Akio, sit on our board along with Brian representing the family, his brother Dean. We have Carol, who represents the Bainbridge Island Japanese community, along with Vern Nakata, Gina, who represents the Indopino community. And so a lot of those original voices from the community are already there amongst us to help us shape and curate and interpret all these buildings. And we're very fortunate not just to have the artifacts, but also the voices, the authentic voices to tell the stories as well.
So I think being a part of the Exclusion Memorial and having visitors come from all over the world year round tells me that having a physical place for people to come to learn about the history is really critical. And so I'm particularly excited for the Indopino community because they have a great story, but there is no physical space right now for them to allow people to come and learn about it. So to me, the Picker cabins and the farm area is the perfect place where those two stories come together, and it'll be a physical place where that story can be told much more easily and more widely.
Yeah, very good point. And I think that's we have Gina has done wonderful work on capturing the story
Yeah,
and being able to then put some actual artifacts and be able to stand somewhere and see in your
yeah,
mind's eye what happened. Very powerful.
that's right. That's right. So I think that is going to be a great addition to the larger story.
I have known about the farm just living here for many years, but not appreciated the sort of uh, beauty that the benign neglect has left you, although it has also left you with a lot of work to do. But it means that there's some of those original materials there that we can preserve that if it had been purchased by somebody else or taken better care of, they might have cleaned things up a little bit too much.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm.
That's very important to us to honor what is old and brings back a traditional sense of community, and to some might seem ancient. So our job is not to try to make them all shiny clean, but to bring them back into a working condition that people can actually use and experience that. And what's so interesting to me in the 2 decades that I've been resident educator on the farm and been collecting all the archives, which we'll have on site, and all the stories, is that every Bainbridge Islander has a story about Suyematsu Farm in one way, shape, or another. From a whole generation of Islanders that we realize are now aging out who grew up, families connected to farms like that, or the agricultural experience, or who were pickers on that farm, who knew Akio, who knew other members of the family. There's so many stories in bed. It came to when it was the pumpkin patch all the way up to the present, did our educational programs. Everyone has a relationship in some way, shape, or form to what we consider sort of the sacred space of that agricultural land. And we just really are so honored to be able to keep those stories alive and connect them with place. We like to say that we're connecting taste and place with where we live and learn. And that's very important to us, along with keeping the active farming going and supporting the active farming. There's almost no place we've been to or have heard about in the United States where you can bear witness to the 100 years of history now with this growing preservation site that we have, along with participate in supporting and being part of a working farm, both at the same integrated, completely integrated. And that's the way it's always been.
Um, if I wanted to learn more and look at some of the pictures, what's the best website where you've started to collect some of this stuff to describe your work?
Well, right now, the best website is educultureproject.org, which is Educulture's original home. And Educulture is the nonprofit that has partnered and absorbed the Suyematsu Farm Legacy Alliance and is channeling our energies towards the work of the Alliance. So educultureproject.org, and you can click on a bunch of different resources that talk about the Alliance, the history of the farm, the history of farming there. We're going to be working to create a unique website for the Suyematsu Farm and the Alliance as we move forward. And yeah, there you go.
So this is the page that is
This is
kind
the
of a
page that right now gives the background around the Alliance. You can read about our board members on the board page. There's also links to more history about the farm, the history of the various farmers, the history of the Suyematsu family, the history of Akio. Right there on the left is Akio Suyematsu in 2012 on the porch of his family farmhouse, and to the right is his sister, Brian's mom, Aiko, who was the youngest of the was originally 7 children, but the youngest brother passed away when he was 9 in the 1930s, and Akio is the youngest who survived with the other 5 children, and is known as a famous 7-Up. If anyone's listening and knows who the 7-Ups were on the island, a group of Japanese American girls who met in 7th grade and became best friends ever since. They're memorialized in the Sakai School. She was one of the 7-Ups. And actually, you were bringing up the visitors to the farm that below. Well, there's actually, if you go up a little bit, Reed, that's the picture of Akio and the sharpening stone. We're still fortunate to have that sharpening stone, which was on the driveway. There was a circular driveway. That's the barn behind. And that was taken in the late 1930s when Akio was probably in his adolescent age, maybe the mid 1930s. So we'll be putting that historic artifact out for people to see and use. And the barn is still standing behind. You see all the support structures that are still holding it up today. Our goal is to eventually take off the support structures, turn the barn back to it being a condition that can support people, and use it, the indoor part, as a demonstration space and classroom. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for putting this together. I know there have been bits and pieces in the news, but I think having this whole story in one capsule is going to be helpful for people who are getting up to speed. And I really want to thank you guys for your hard work, the people who are who are here, and those of you who are on the board and working who aren't on this call.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Reed. Appreciate the ability to tell this story more widely.
Well, we will be cheering you on, and if there's anything else that the Senior Community Center can do to help support the effort, please let us know.
Thank you very much for helping us tell this story, and also for giving a shout out to One Call for All. We're all honored to be agencies as part of that, and that relationship is very important to us right now, that we officially now have control of the property.
Yeah, and
can do
what a
something
great,
with it.
what a great way to do it, because One Call for All is a community effort to help the community.
Yeah.
We live here, we give here, I think is their
Yeah.
little.
Yeah.
Okay.